All right, it's me again, your host. And next, if you may recall from what was to me last night, I said I was going to cover a concept that's going to include some of these characteristics right here from Neoclassical economics. It is in fact called No, the dog's in here because Melanie is at work. The loanable funds theory of interest. And as I said last night, or perhaps to you moments ago, the reason I want to cover this is one, because I want to show you an example of a neoclassical model. It's easy to go through the list, but then you're like, okay, but what would that look like, right? So I'm going to give you an example. I want to give you an example that illustrates in particular the idea that the economy tends to be self-regulating, that it tends to fix itself, and that's what this is. And then third, I have something in my eye. And then fourth, this will be directly contrasted with something later that Keynes said that was in opposition to this, so I wanted to bring it into evidence now so we can then compare it later. All right. So, loanable funds theory of interest. And let's get started here. Okay, usually this takes me a little bit in class, and so it will here too, because I need to do a little bit of background first. And that background involves macroeconomics. And the idea that total expenditures in a closed system must, I may zoom in a little bit more, sorry. I'm just now, it's like 7:17 in the morning. Melanie had to get up at 5:30 to go to work. And I was going to go ahead and sleep some more, but then the dog said, no, let's get up. Stupid jerk. All right, anyway. So I thought, well, I'll go ahead and get started on videos. Maybe a bit more? Yeah, because I don't care if I see the frame of the... Okay. Ouch. And you see how it's still zooming in? I don't know why it does that. There must be some fascinating technological reason, but I don't want it to. I have to turn off some sort of auto thing, I guess. Okay, back out. All right, that'll work. Will it? Oh, sorry. Dagnabbit. I'm going to move it a little bit more. Wrong way. All right. Please don't continue to adjust on my computer or camera. It did not this time. Okay. And is that how far? Well, I can't reach that far anyway. But it's going to stop about in there. All right. Okay. In a macroeconomy, in a closed system, total expenditures must be equal to total income, which must be equal to total output. It logically must be true because, for example, every time you make an expenditure, it becomes somebody else's income. And every time you get income, it's because someone made an expenditure. And if you're making an expenditure, it's for something. So those dollar values have to all add up to the same thing. And in fact, if you have had intro macro, you may have learned that there's what they call expenditures approach and income approach in calculating GDP. In other words, they calculate GDP by adding up everybody's income, and then they also calculate it by adding up everybody's expenditures, because they've got this data, right, when you turn in your income taxes, and then they've got these data from firms. Firms tell them how much they sold. And theoretically, they should be the exact same number. Now, they never are, because people round stuff off, people lie, and this sort of thing. But they know that logically they should be the same number, and they want to double check it. So not only is this something that is relevant in theory, heck, even in practice we actually employ this concept right here. Again, the idea that in a closed system, in a macroeconomy, that every time you make an expenditure, when do you make an expenditure that it doesn't become some other entity's income? And that is by definition what you're doing. When you're standing in the grocery store and you've pushed your cart of stuff up there and they've slid it across the little laser that figures out all the prices, when you run your card through the credit card machine, you just made an expenditure. But to the grocery store, that transaction was income. And for what? For the stuff in the cart. In fact, these are simply three ways of looking at the exact same transaction. Every individual transaction generates a number that's called expenditures, which is when you spend the money. Every single one generates income. I shouldn't say it that way. It's the same transaction. It just depends on which side of the register you're standing on. If you're standing on the non-cash register side, it was an expenditure. If you're standing on the cash register side, it was income. And the stuff in the cart is the output. So every individual transaction, you write down the same number 3 times, okay? Now, so that turns out to be very important to this and to the concept we're going to cover later that I told you is in contradiction to this particular theory. Now, let's see. Again, if you had macro already, you may find this familiar, but we're going to use Y for basically gross domestic product, or the total dollar value of all goods and services produced and sold in the U.S. in a given year or a given quarter or whatever. So we're going to use Y. We're not going to write GDP every time. We're just going to put Y up there. And second, sometimes I'll refer to Y as total income. Sometimes I'll refer to it as total expenditure. And sometimes I'll refer to it as total output. And now you know why. Because it's all the same number. And depending on the context, it might be more convenient to refer to it as income in one context, expenditure in another, and income in another. But I'm allowed to call, and being a senior faculty member, when I have visited younger faculty members' classrooms, I've noticed this is something you got to be really careful about when you're teaching the intro macro class, is to make sure everyone's clear on the idea that why you're allowed to refer to Y in 3 different ways. Because it can be very confusing to students. We're used to it. But almost you're sitting there thinking, I thought the professor said that was expenditure, and now she's referring to it as income. What the hell? And this is why. This is why. Because every individual transaction generates 3 ledger entries, if you will. And again, my point here is that I'm going to refer to Y sometimes as income, sometimes as expenditure, sometimes as output, depending on what's going to be most helpful to you in that context to think about it. But it's all the same number. But wait, there's more. Let's think about it as expenditure for a moment. The way we calculate expenditures, the way we define GDP, is it's composed of 4 different kinds of expenditures. Consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. How much we sold minus how much we bought, right? Net exports. So that's how we calculate GDP every year. We add up consumption expenditures plus investment expenditures plus government expenditures plus net exports. And of course, all this is creating income at the same time, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, let's see here. This includes, both the federal government, state and local, any kind of government spending. And this is, of course, what we sell to people in other countries minus what we bought from them. We're going to keep it simple with this analysis right here. We're going to get rid of the government and get rid of foreigners. Every Texan's dream come true. And so, we're going to deal with just these 2 right here. Just sort of like a pure private sector economy. There's no government involvement in the economy, and none of them dang foreigners messing everything up, all right? So we're going to do just C plus I. And now let me explain what C and I are, if I may. Okay. Consumption expenditures. Let's see here. This here was a consumption expenditure, my cellular phone, and my Cincinnati Reds baseball cap was a consumption expenditure. Anything that the household is buying for its own personal use is going to be a consumption expenditure. Right? So that's the vast majority of what you're familiar with. You go out to a restaurant, consumption expenditure, and so on. However, when TCU bought this, that was investment. And you want to be clear on what this investment means right here. It doesn't mean buying stocks and bonds, right? That's actually a form of savings. That this is look, I drew a factory. This is like building factories. All right, this kind of spending is like building factories. This is physical investment. As opposed to financial investment. All right. So, financial investment doesn't directly create jobs and income. Physical does. If I'm going to build a new restaurant, that's going to create a bunch of jobs. If I'm going to add on to TCU's campus, that's going to create a bunch of new jobs. So, physical investment. Now, what falls under the category? So only firms do physical investment. Only firms do this. What falls under that category? Well, anything that, see, how did I used to define this? I had a good definition I made up for one of my classes. Anything that contributes to the ability to produce output, but which doesn't become part of output. That all fit? Yeah, it did. Okay. You're making a physical investment expenditure as a firm, as an entrepreneur, as a member of the board at TCU. Whenever you purchase anything that contributes to your ability to produce output, but doesn't become part of the output. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. What about when they buy raw materials? But we're not counting raw materials here. This is investment spending for TCU when they buy these. It's not a building, but it doesn't matter. These are things that contributed to the ability, I mean, heck, I'm using them right now, producing the output that TCU sells, right? So this enables me, this helps me produce the output, but when you graduate, the chancellor does not hand you your diploma and here's a pen, all right? So this doesn't become part of what you take with you. Let's see. Let's talk about a restaurant. At a restaurant, if the tableware you use is metal, you're not supposed to take it with you, right? You're supposed to leave it there and they clean it, right? That would be when the restaurant buys the tableware, I guess, well, I'm avoiding the word silverware for a reason. Tableware, that is physical investment because that's going to help them produce restaurant meals, but you don't get to take it with you. What about if you're at a place where they give you plastic utensils? That's not investment spending anymore because that you take with you. That is part of the product they're selling, all right? You take the, at Kentucky Fried Chicken, the spork, one of the most brilliant inventions of all time, the spork, you get to take it with you. So in that case, when Kentucky Fried Chicken buys sporks, or foons, as I believe they're called in the South, let's make that up, sporks, then that is not an investment expenditure. It's only things that don't become part of the output. All right, so this, TCU purchased this for me, all right, to use. And it is because, in order to do my job. What else we got in here? The eraser. TCU bought that, and it doesn't become part of the output. Now, let's see. On the other hand, the paper that they print your diploma on, that's not investment spending because you take that with you, all right? You get to keep that. All right, so that's what investment spending is. If you always think to yourself, it's a factory, then that's not exactly right because it's much more than factories, but you'll never go wrong. So let me say that again. If you always think of physical investment as building a factory, you'll always come to the right conclusions about what physical investment is. It's actually much broader than that because it includes this. But nevertheless, if you want to make sure that you're, don't sit there and worry yourself over, well, gosh, is so-and-so investment? Is so-and-so physical investment? No. Just think of a factory, all right? Now, what about the stuff that does become part of the output? What about at a Mexican restaurant, you order fajitas. What about the chicken? What about the chicken? that when the Mexican restaurant buys the raw, well, I was going to say raw uncooked, that's the same thing, isn't it? The raw chicken, then that's not physical investment for them. And it's also not a consumption expenditure. So where does it fit in? It actually does fit under consumption expenditure because it is a raw material for what they're going to sell you, what you're going to take with you inside your stomach, presumably, but what you're going to take with you. So it becomes part of when they buy chicken, it becomes part of consumption. And we don't need to ask the Mexican restaurant, how much did you spend for the chicken? We don't need to know that. All we need to know is what they charge for the fajita. All right? Because the fajita includes all the ingredients from all the things they bought to create the fajitas. Right? Now you got the tortillas, you got the onions and so forth. That's all inside there. So we only measure the cost of the fajitas. We don't bother with the sort of things that fed into the fajita because presumably the restaurant charged you for what it cost them to get the chicken. Now, there may be individual instances where that turns out not to be true because the company was going under and they're selling stuff under cost. But in general, at a macro level, we're like, look, at the macro level, when Hewlett-Packard sold this to TCU, they charged TCU for all the internal components that they had to buy from someone else, and then they also added on a profit. All right. So we don't bother to take account of raw materials separately because the raw materials that feed into consumption goods, for example, well, they're already in the price of the final consumption goods. All right. So we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about, once again, we don't need to worry about how much it cost the Mexican restaurant to buy the raw chicken because they charged you that amount plus when you bought the fajitas. So, going back to this, in this simplified world, there's only two kinds of final expenditures, all right? Final expenditures, consumption goods and investment goods. When consumers buy consumption goods or services, we put the number here. When firms build a new factory, we put the number over here, all right? Okay, in our simplified world. Now think about this. Okay, so we're thinking about this as expenditure. Now think of it as income. There's only two things you can do with income. You can spend it or save it. You know, consumption or savings. Notice there's no taxes here because we got rid of the government. So consumption and savings are the only two things you can do. Those of you who are math majors just noticed, mon Dieu, as they say in French math classes. Well, then it must be true that investment equals savings. Because remember, these two are the exact same number. This is expenditures. This is income. And I'm sorry, I should say, I'm sorry, no, that's okay. Expenditures are either consumption expenditures or investment expenditures. And then once you have your income, what can you do with it? You can either spend it or consume with it, or you can save it. So investment and savings must end up being the same number. And that's right. It does. If we get rid of the government sector and the foreign trade. The same concept that I'm about to go through would still be true, but it would be more complicated to explain it. All right, so that's why we're going to just deal with this simple scenario right here. Now, there are no economists on the face of the earth. There was one guy, but we killed him last year, who disagree that this is true. Sure, no problem. Sure, no problem. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so there's not going to be any disagreement over that among all the various schools of thought. What there is disagreement about, and listen carefully to this, what there is disagreement about is the process by which they are equated. How do they come to rest at equality is the question. And in this neoclassical model I'm going to show here, the process by which they return to equality, if ever they're knocked out of equality, the process by which they return to equality is a nice, happy one because it ends up keeping us at full employment, keeping us at a point where everyone who wants a job has a job. And let me illustrate here. Okay, now let's see. Yeah. It's all in the book again, but I'm going to give you more detail here. Let's see. And I'll probably show you that in a minute too. Okay. I'm going to make 5 assumptions about the way this world works here that I'm going to lay out. And let me sort of bullet these over here. Only households... I'll move the camera up in just a second. Only households earn income and save. Move that up a little bit so I can see that. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Let me see how that looks on the monitor. I gotta get out of the way because it's trying to focus on me. And why wouldn't it? Okay, yeah, a little bit more actually. In fact, I may just... Yeah, let's just do that. Okay. Only households earn income and save. So we're going to assume, for simplicity, that firms don't retain earnings. They do in real life, but let's pretend they don't for simplicity. Just to sort of start off with a simple story here. Only firms borrow and invest. All right, so, and firms have to borrow to invest if they don't keep any income. They don't have any money left over. So if they're going to invest, if they're going to build a factory, then they have to go to the bank and borrow some money. Come on, camera, quit doing that. I think it's because, okay, I'll try to get completely out of shot here. Just trying to decide what I should be focusing on. Okay, next one. Savings is a positive function of the interest rate. When interest rates go up, people save more. When interest rates go down, people save less. So plus means same direction. It doesn't mean up, it means same direction. When R goes up, S goes up. When R goes down, S goes down. So we're going to assume that people are willing to save more when they are rewarded more for saving. Oops, I wrote that a little bit too close. Oh, and now I'm just an idiot. All right, let's see. Investment is a negative function of the interest rate. If firms have to borrow this money in order to invest, then when it's costlier to borrow the money, when this goes up, this goes down. And when it's cheaper to borrow the money, when this goes down, that goes up. So negative sign here means opposite direction. And here's our 5th important assumption. The financial sector pays R on, I have to get down over here and do this, on household, how close am I getting? I'm sorry, on household S. So they pay interest on household saving, and what have I got here? Earn interest on, yeah. And earn R on firms borrowing to invest. All right. What's the financial sector do in this situation? It pays interest on household savings, and then it earns interest on firms borrowing to invest. All right. So this is the world that we're setting up here in this neoclassical model. And there are some simplifying assumptions, which is always true. There's no way we can go through, I mean, if the real world were so simple that we could make everything exactly realistic, then we probably wouldn't need the economics discipline to try to model it. But it isn't like that. It's too complicated. So here's what's going to be going on in this world. Banks are going to be trying to attract enough household saving up here to be able to have the money in their vaults that they then turn around and loan out to firms for investment. And one of the goals, I guess I could add this as another assumption here, but I don't. One of the goals here is to not have money just sitting in the vault. Why? Because they pay interest on the savings. All right, so they don't want the money sitting in the vault. And so maybe you can see here already what's going to happen is they're going to have the incentive to, whenever S isn't equal to I, to make S equal to I, because they don't want any money sitting in the vault that isn't being borrowed. And furthermore, if there's an increase in the demand for investment loans, well, they want to bring some more money in. They want to make sure, and by the way, of course, this interest rate and this interest rate are not the same one. You know, they are paying less than they are earning on firm borrowing, and so they're making money off the spread between those two interest rates. But you know, if you're in a money and banking class, maybe you want to talk about that. But here, all we're worried about is movements in the interest rate. No, these are not the same interest rate, but they're going to move the same direction. Almost always move the same direction. If they are paying more for household savings, they're going to charge more for firms to borrow money. And if they are paying less, then competition among banks will force them to offer less in, to charge less in interest down here. Okay. All right. Now let's say we start off here. So that finishes that. Start at S equals I and full employment. All right. Let's just say, for sake of argument, we start off in a situation where everything's great. Or as Emmett Brakowski would say, gosh, what is it that he says? Everything is, oh man, I can't remember that from the Lego movie. You're probably sitting there right now saying, you moron, it's so-and-so. Let's see. So we start off where everything is awesome. All right? We're at savings is equal to investment and full employment, the world is great. Now let's say that firms decide, for whatever reason, to lower investment. So firms decide not to borrow as much for investment this period, which, by the way, happened before the Great Depression. There was a big collapse in investment. So this potentially could be a huge problem. This could cause a recession. And the question is, well, now what happens? You know, what does this set into motion in the world that's described up here? Does there now result a recession? Is it not true? Let me read that study question to you again from, or not study question, but where is it? Right here? Sorry, I need page 8, and I have apparently taken them out of order. 4, 8. All right. Remember, under the modern characteristics of neoclassicism, free markets is natural and benevolent. The belief that, generally speaking, free markets are best and the economy takes care of itself, all right? That we don't need government intervention, we don't need, that it's going to automatically return itself to full employment, don't worry. So, this recession threatens here, right? Okay, well, what happens next is that if I'm the banker, then I'm in a situation where now savings is greater than investment. The amount of money I'm paying to depositors is still the same as it was before we started. But I'm earning less money from borrowers. So I'm unhappy about this. I've got money just sitting in the vault that no one is borrowing. This is costing me money and I'm making nothing off of it. I want to get rid of those loanable funds, which is where the name of this particular model comes from. I want to get rid of those loanable funds. I want to make sure somebody borrows them. So how do I figure out a way to make somebody borrow the money? And actually, I got two goals here. I want to make sure people borrow more and deposit less. All right. So either one's going to fix my problem. All right. Either one's going to fix my problem. Well, I'm going to lower the interest rate. I'm going to lower the interest rate because that's going to address my problem. Lowering the interest rate is going to increase investment, because if this goes down, that goes up, and it's going to lower savings. If this goes down, that goes down. So it will move them back to equality, because for me, equality is the ideal situation, because that way I'm loaning out every penny that's in the vault. Ouch. So now when you lower the interest rate, let me move my chair out of the way here. when you lower the interest rate, I'm going to have to do a little bit of an long arrow out here to get away from my S greater than I. That's going to, as I've already said, it's going to raise investment and lower savings. And remember, if you're not saving, then you must be consuming. So if those households decided, hey, let's save less, that's the same thing as, hey, let's spend more. And this process continues until savings equals investment again. So I'm going to lower the interest rate. How far am I going to lower? I'm going to lower it till they're equal again. All right. The only point at which I'm going to be satisfied again is going to be when savings is equal to investment. And check this out. Now, recession threatened, right? I'm going to write that right there. Recession threatens. A recession threatens because investment fell. Well, but then entirely out of my own self-interest as the banker, I'm not thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I need to stop the recession. No, I'm just looking at my income and expenditures, and I'm thinking, this sucks. I'm paying the same on savings, but I'm earning less on firms borrowing. So I should do something about this in my own self-interest. Nothing to do with the rest of the world. And yet, my action in my own self-interest solves a problem for the rest of the world. Because both of those are reinvigorating spending. Reinvigorates spending. All right, we can barely see that. Spending goes back up. The action I take reverses the decline in spending. The only question we haven't addressed here, which I will in a moment, is this increase equal to this increase? And it is. I'm sorry, decrease. Is this increase right here of the same magnitude of that decrease? Because if it's not, then we still have a problem. And we can't go, we're not back to full employment. We're not back to the point at which everyone who wants to work has a job, and which is what full employment is, roughly speaking. So the only question we haven't answered here is this going to be the same magnitude as this? And there's two ways to explain why the answer is yes. And let me do the easy one first. Okay, and this is what I do when it's actually normal times at TCU. I'm looking out at the classroom. Let's get kind of in the middle here. I'm looking at the classroom and I say, okay, this half of the class, I got to keep my hands in here. This half of the classroom, you're the households. This half, you're the firms. All right. And let's say that right now, you folks are saving as much as you folks are borrowing for investment. But then, and everything's great, right? Everything's awesome. Then, for me, the right-hand side of the classroom lowers the amount of investment they want to undertake. So that creates that gap right there, right? This is how much I'm the banker now, this is how much I'm spending interest on. I'm having to pay these people, and I'm earning from these people. I got that gap right there is how much money that's doing nothing for me, that's just sitting in the vault. So what I want to do is I want to lower the interest rate. Well, the interest rate is going to cause this to come back up. Not all the way. There's no reason to believe that the interest rate fall. In fact, you'll see why in a second. Because we don't need it to go all the way back up. Because while this is going up, that's coming down. And remember, I'm not going to stop until they're equal again, right? So however big the gap is to start with, my incentive is to lower interest rates until the entire gap is gone. And whether that gap is gone by raising investment or lowering savings, I don't really care. I'm just trying to get rid of the money that's sitting in the vault. But however big that gap is, and that gap is this, however big that gap is, when I lower the interest rate, it's going to cause investment to come back up, right there, it's going to cause investment to come back up and savings to come down, which is the same thing as saying consumption going up, right? So, yes, absolutely. If the gap is initially this big, if the fall in investment is this big, then absolutely the increase in investment and the increase in consumption will be exactly that big. Why? Because my goal is to get rid of all the money sitting in the vault. How much money is sitting in the vault? This much. So investment comes up and savings comes down until they're equal again. And savings going down is the same thing as consumption going up. Dang! Ain't that kind of interesting? And let me now show you here. You may want to pause the video and jot all this down, but let me show you what I have typed out here in my lecture notes to explain this. But I guess this speaks poorly of me, but I've been looking forward to this since last night. I've been looking forward to explaining this. I really enjoy, even theories I don't think are true are fun to explain. So, which by the way happens to be true of this theory. I don't think it's right, but it's really fun to explain. Okay, so if you want to pause the video there and jot all that down, the summary statement is just kind of saying, basically what we're going to say here in this model is that when interest rates, the changes in interest rates will restore investment equals savings. And more than that, at the full employment level. So there's the 5 assumptions. Have I got a pen here handy? Yeah, I do. Let me put a little bullet point on all those. I don't have it that way in my notes, but there. There's the 5 bulleted points. And then the analysis start at S equals I full employment. Now say firms decide to lower investments such that I is less than S and recession threatens. Causes a problem for the financial sector since they're now earning less from firm borrowing but paying the same on household savings. They lower interest rates to encourage the former and discourage the latter. This leads to where the rise in consumption is exactly the same size as the net fall in investment. Because there's a net fall in investment, right? Investment falls and then comes back up some, but it still leaves a gap. But that's okay, consumption takes up the gap. Therefore, the fall in the interest rate has the effect of reinvigorating spending exactly as much as it would have fallen, thereby avoiding recession. Returning to page 8, the belief that generally speaking free markets are best in the economy takes care of itself. And that's what just happened here. That people's own self-interest kept us at full employment. All right? There may have been a temporary deviation away from it, but the economy is always working its way back towards full employment. Hey, I just thought here, okay, I want to show you one more thing there, and I just thought here to read something to you off what they call the internet. Control-Alt-Delete. I'm so ashamed of my password. It's the name of a French city with various symbols included and so forth. And I misspelled it. So every time I type it in, I feel embarrassed because I know that's not how it's spelled. And I want here Christina Romer and Business Cycle. Okay, I'll look that up in a second. All right, so I told you there's 2 ways to show this. The fact that this black line here, that those 2 are equal. Here's the second way to do it. If this were an advanced macro class, I teach a class on business cycles that requires intermediate macro. So you already have to have had intermediate macro first, and so it's like an advanced macro class. And guess what? We actually talk about the real world expansions and recessions. Now it's shocking as an econ major to see us talking about the real world, but we do. And in that class, I'm not going to go over this in great detail, but I just want to show you what you do if we model this formally. Because everything I drew on the board just now, we can just do this way. I'm going to measure both savings and investment on this axis down here. I'm going to measure the interest rate up here. And then I can put here a savings function, which is exactly what, that's just what we did a minute ago. Savings is a positive function of the interest rate. Interest rates go up, savings goes up. And then I'll do investment. which is a negative function of the interest rate. Now, notice here we started off, let's see, I guess I'll continue to do this part in black. I sub 0 equal S sub 0, R sub 0. Okay, so we start off, and let's just say we're at full employment as our initial assumption. Savings is equal to investment at this interest rate. But then remember what I said in the previous example. Oh no, firms decide to invest less. Investment prime. And so for a time, until the interest rate adjusts, savings is still at S sub 0, but investment is now at I sub 1. And so this is that situation where investment is less than savings. Again, you don't have to follow this, but I just want to show you how, some people have already had intermediate macro, and you might be interested in this. And let's see, I have a text from Melanie. Okay, I wanted to know if she wanted me to boil some eggs for her lunch this week. She says no. So now what's happening is those financial institutions are saying, well, crap, we're paying interest on this, we're earning interest on this, let's lower the interest rate. And how far are they going to lower the interest rate? To there. Let's call that R sub 2. And I'm not quite going to have room to write this. I sub 2 equals S sub 2. So notice they're going to be equal again. That as you bring the interest rate across, and when you hit the investment curve, it's here. When you hit the savings curve, it's here. So savings and investment must be equal again. And then notice then that, let's see here. Yeah, here is, what color have I not used? Blue. Here was the net decline in investment. Investment dropped down to here, but then it jumped back up some. So there's the net decline in investment. Notice it's the exact same size as the net decline in savings. Therefore, the net increase, I'm sorry, not net, I shouldn't say net there because it only changed once. But the net decline in investment is exactly the same size as the decline in savings, therefore exactly the same size as the increase in consumption. So you can show it graphically, actually much, in some ways more simply, but I don't know, I hate to scare people in classes that haven't had this background yet. All right, so there's that. And I wanted to read one thing to you before I finish off this particular lesson. You might be thinking, well, but I mean, surely nobody really believes that the economy automatically tries to get back to full employment like that. Yes, they do. And this is from Christina Romer, who, there it is, who was the, at one point, the chief, what do you call it? The chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under Barack Obama. And so therefore you would figure someone who was relatively interventionist as an economist working for a Democrat rather than for a Republican, where it might be more likely that they're thinking, well, leave the economy alone, it takes care of itself, all right? So, but even the Democratic chief of the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors says this about business cycles. Just as there is no regularity in the timing of business cycles, there is no reason why cycles have to occur at all. The prevailing view among economists is that there is a level of economic activity, often referred to as full employment, at which the economy theoretically could stay forever. So she's saying, yeah, it could stay there forever. Don't worry. The economy fixes itself. And this is from someone who is a left-leaning neoclassical economist. Okay. I believe that's just about it for this. Next, if this is the video for Contending Perspectives, next will be Marxism. And if it's I'm going to use the same video also for other classes where I go over the same concept. If it's for another class, we're not doing Marxism next.